So today is the first Sunday of Advent, as you know. Advent is takes the first 4 Sundays before Christmas, and the goal is to think about what the coming of the baby Jesus means. So last time I talked about the Ricky Bobby praying for baby Jesus, which it still makes me laugh. But it's not about the baby Jesus, right? It's about creating this kind of sense of expectation. I was thinking about that. That there are different ways of understanding that kind of sense of expectation. Like there are moments when you get these kind of unexpected pleasures, and those are fun, right? You can't really anticipate those, but it is kind of fun to just like Annalise came home from college, and her someone had found, like she had gotten $50 bill for graduation in the spring, and she had lost it. She had misplaced it, and we found it while she was gone, and we didn't tell her that we'd found it. We just stuck it on her, put it in an envelope and stuck it on her mirror. And so she walked into her room, and sure enough, first thing she found, like she pulled open the envelope, hey, my $50, right? So those moments are really fun, but you can't really anticipate, right? You can't anticipate those, but when you get them, that's a lot of fun. And sometimes we'll talk about this a lot at Christmas. Like sometimes the buildup itself is really pleasurable, right? You know, it's fun to just anticipate. I think kids are like this about Christmas. A lot of times the buildup in some ways is even more fun than the actual event, right? The anticipation of what's going to come is more fun than the actual event. My dad used to get really mad at us. I have 3 brothers, so there are 4 of us. He'd be really mad because they spent all this money on presents, and then literally 5 minutes after we opened presents, we were whacking each other with the cardboard things from the wrapping, you know, the big cardboard thing. So he always said, we could just give you these cardboard wrappers, right? That's not the that's what Christmas is all about, I guess. But I think for Advent, what we're about is not so much this kind of build up, right? It's not just the pleasure of anticipation, although that's a real thing. It's about trying to create meaning, right? What does the coming of or the advent of Jesus mean? And can we create meaning? Can we understand that in such a way that when we celebrate Christmas, it has this kind of deeper resonance, right? How should we receive Jesus when he comes? What does the advent of Jesus actually mean? I remember when we brought when Annalise was born, our first daughter was born, like the moment is very exciting, and being in the hospital was very exciting, and so we were just sort of caught up in that, and we didn't really think about kind of what was next. And even we were at the Mayo Clinic, which is, you know, one of the best hospitals in the world, so they have these really rigorous procedures for getting you out of the hospital, and we had to take the car seat in and demonstrate that we had the car seat in place in the right way, and checked all these boxes to get out. And, you know, so that was kind of stressful and exciting. And then when I remember driving home, and we pulled in and pulled the car carrier out of the car seat and walked in, and set her down on the floor, and the dog came up and sniffed her and then sat down. And we just looked at each other and were like, okay, now what's next? Like, we have no idea what we're supposed to do. And so we just literally, the 3 of us, it was Michelle and me and the dog, and there was Annalise, and we just kind of looked at her like, what does this mean? And we have no idea what we're supposed to do next. I still kind of feel that kind of weird, helpless feeling occasionally about them, although she started crying soon, so then things picked up after that. But that's the question, right? The question of Advent is, what does this mean? How do we, when Jesus comes, what do we do? What is this? How do we receive him? And we're going to spend the next 4 Sundays figuring that out. The lead up to Christmas is an attempt to figure that out. So I'll leave the other 3 to the other guys, but this Sunday's about hope. But it's framed in a weird way. It's sometimes called the little apocalypse. Which is a weird idea, because part of the way in which we want to lead up to Christmas is to read these kind of strange apocalyptic texts. And so I'll just apologize to Don for kind of throwing that weird apocalyptic text on him, this morning, because it's a strange text, and it's kind of hard. The imagery is really weird. The language is really weird. It just throws a lot at you. The gospel text today was from Matthew 13, which is in some ways even weirder. It's kind of an apocalypse. The Matthew text begins, in those days, the sun will be darkened, and it just goes downhill from there, right? It's like, let's just imagine the worst possible thing, and then and just add everything we can to it. Now, I will say that students love this stuff. Like if I get stuck in a theology class or something, or I will do this. I actually have a graduate class, a theology class, and I always play Stump the Prof at the end of the class. And they always want to know about Revelation. Like they always want to play, tell us about the end times. And boy, if you got a class that's sleeping, you mention something like that, like they just perk up. When I was I mostly teach philosophy here, but when I was in Minnesota, my title had theology in it, and so people would call up with theology questions, and they would just patch them through to me, which is annoying and weird. I got Jehovah's Witness all the time, and so they would just and I got pretty good at sussing them out, but I bet I had 6 or 7 like Jehovah's Witness call up to try to talk me out of believing in the Trinity. But the other kind of thing I got a lot was people calling up to talk about the end times. And one time I even got like this manuscript. Somebody had sent this manuscript in which they had written out the signs of the times. Like they had parsed everything in all these apocalyptic texts, and then said, okay, so here's what's happening. This was about the time, I don't know if you remember, Minnesota Senator Paul Wellstone died in a plane wreck. So that was a sign of the time, and it produced this whole, they were wrong, I guess, but because Jesus hadn't come back yet, but it was it was an effort to figure it all out. When I was in college, someone had predicted in '87 that the world was going to end, and it was actually on a day when we were having a Greek test. So one of my classmates, we went in and wrote Rapture '87. You missed it, and then everybody left. Which again didn't go that great. It was old Dr. Webb. He'd been there 200 years by the time I was there still. He had lived through many predictions of the rapture and was not impressed by our attempt to get out of a Greek test. But that's so it's sort of the imagery is weird, and it's exotic and kind of fun to deal with, but it really isn't the point, right? Anytime you read any apocalyptic text in the Bible, they're not really about the future, right? They will start with the future. They will say the sky's going to dark, and here's all the signs, and Jesus is going to come back, and right, all of that stuff. But it's really about getting your house in order now. In the Matthew text, he says, right, he talks about all the signs of the times, and then Jesus says, now no one knows the day or hour. Right, the signs are kind of irrelevant, right? This isn't about what's going to happen in the future, because nobody really knows. The point is, how do you wait, right? How do you anticipate what's going to come? Just a couple weeks ago, Michelle took Josephine to Atlanta for a soccer tournament, and they were gone from Friday to Sunday, and so it was just the other two and me. And it's possible we didn't do a whole lot of cleaning while they were gone, including dishwashing and vacuuming. We got this big dog who's great, but he sheds a lot, right? So you got to vacuum 3 or 4 times a day, and wash dishes and all the other stuff. And so on Sunday, they called and said they were on their way home, and then it's job one, because we have to get everything done before they get home. We have to clean up the house before they get home, and this is something we've done before. Like, we have a whole routine about it, and part of the way we think about them coming home is we imagine what Mama's going to say. Like, so just imagine if Mama walks in and sees the dishes overflowing out of the sink and down onto the floor. What will Mama say if she walks in and sees that? some pretty dark thoughts emerge. We were pretty sure that mom is not going to be happy if she walks in and sees dishes overflowing and dog hair just floating around in the air, like floating on the breeze of the wind. Or we'll also ask, when is she going to be back? When is she going to be back? And I don't tell them that I have her on Find My Friend, so I know pretty precisely where she is. So what we always say is, we have no idea, let's hurry, right? We don't know when she's going to be back. We better get this done right away. And the point isn't that Michelle's actually going to be angry or that she's just going to unexpectedly walk into the house. Although both those things are possible, but that's not the point. The point is the house should be clean. The point is we have to get things in order. We have to take what's a mess. We have to take what's chaotic and give it some order, give it some shape, so that we have the house the way it's supposed to be. Right? The anticipation of the return of mama, in this case, is really just a catalyst, right? It's really just an idea that helps us think about what do we need to do to bring the house back in order. Every apocalypse in the New Testament is about that. All the ones in the Gospels, there are several in the Gospels. In fact, we read one last week, right? When the Son of Man comes and he separates the sheep from the goats, right? That's an apocalypse, but that's really about the present, right? It's about taking care of the poor and the needy in the present. In fact, all the stuff we pray about, right, is exactly what that apocalypse is about. The one in Mark that we could have read for today, it's really about the present, all right? How do we wait? How do we anticipate? The one in Revelation is really about the present. It's about cleaning up the mess that the Roman Empire has created, right? So an apocalypse is always about the here and now. It feels like it's about the present, but it's always about the here and now. So I guess the question for today is, how do we wait, right? So what do we do specifically that helps us wait better? And so let me just give you two, kind of the same thing almost, but two suggestions for how to wait. And I'm really offering these as a way of kind of orienting us towards Christmas. We've kind of made that turn now. When Christmas is coming. So how do we anticipate that? What kinds of things do we do that'll bring us home to Christmas? So here are two, and they're kind of the same thing. The first one is to pay attention to absence. One of the things I'm struck by that Isaiah passage we read today is just this deep awareness that sin and injustice are part of the world. And the hard thing to do is to actually pay attention to those, right? To recognize those, because it's really easy to sort of get into this, you kind of put, I don't really know how to say it, but you kind of put blinders on, right? This happens in houses all the time, right? Something's dirty, and if you walk by it enough times, then you just kind of stop noticing that it's dirty. Or there's a rattle in your car, there's a squeal from the tires, you just turn the radio up a little bit and you don't quite notice it, right? And then it just sort of slips away, right? You sort of lose sight of it. And I think part of what the Bible is calling us to here is to pay attention, right? To be aware of those kind of little things, right? Those little moments that just happen day in and day out, right? Moments of injustice, awareness that there's famine somewhere, awareness that people are sick, awareness that this virus isn't, we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? Just cultivating this sort of awareness of those kind of big systemic things, but also awareness of our own personal sinfulness. Both texts say a lot about the reality that I do things that are wrong, and I do them habitually, right? I get up in the morning and I kind of repeat these patterns of doing things that are wrong. And part of my job is to attend to that, to pay attention, to figure out when are those moments and what are they? And then we can start to think about what to do about it. But you don't know how to fix it until you know what it is. For me, the thing I'm thinking about the most today is my sort of temptation to self-justify, to justify myself. I just had this moment a couple days ago. I don't look at Facebook very much, and here's why. Because I got on Facebook, and two things happened. One is I several years ago, 4 years ago, I put a picture of my dad and my wife and my brother who had just gotten his PhD and me. And we were all in our kind of doctoral robes, and I wrote 4 Dr. Weedmans on it. Well, Facebook flagged that for drug use because of the weed. It took my mom a little while to figure that out, but but because of the weed, man. So I hadn't been on for weeks, and I got this notice that said, we've removed this photo because of drug reference or something like that. So that was fun. I sent that to all my family, like, look at us now. We're famous. So that was the first thing that happened. And then once I got through that, then I kind of scrolled through for a while, and I found one of my old students from Minnesota none of my Johnson students would do this, but one of my old Minnesota students had said something dumb on Facebook. And I composed, like in my head, I composed this long kind of refutation of what they had said. And I had many points in my favor. And I started to write it out. And I thank Jesus that I actually had this moment when I just deleted the whole thing, because it's just pointless, because debating on Facebook is maybe the worst thing you can do. Now that's overstated, but it's almost never helpful, because it really just becomes an exercise in self-justification, right? It's not about genuine exchange usually. It's not about reaching for the truth, right? It really just is an attempt to make it clear that I'm right and you're wrong. And those kind of back and forths, I really have to work hard not to engage in that. Because Christians are about the truth, and we're about relationships that produce truth, not about this kind of exercise in self-justification. So I'll just name that for myself. And we can talk more about kind of what maybe what that would be for the rest of us. But for me, that's the thing I'm going to work on. I think this Advent is being relational and open to real truth, and not just trying to make everybody believe that my truth is the right truth politically, or about what sports team is the best one, whatever, right? We're about some kind of deeper reality. So that's the first thing. So pay attention to the absence of Christ. Pay attention to those moments when we need Jesus in terms of our own injustice or our own sin. But then the flip side is also true, and maybe just as important. The texts are pretty clear that we are to pay attention to the presence of Jesus, right? Those kind of moments of possibility. I really love the reason I read that strange text from Isaiah is I love that line about we are the clay and you are the potter, right? We used to sing this song, I am the potter, you are the potter, I am the clay. That's a really powerful metaphor, because what it means is that we could be better, that there's a possibility that the world could be better, right? The actual worst thing I think that happens is that we wait without hope, right? To sit, I don't know if you've ever sat with somebody kind of waiting to be sentenced to go to jail or something like that. But that's the word. I worked in for about a year, I was a prison intern for a prison chaplain. And it was one of the most educational things I've ever done. But there are moments, right? What the chaplain, the full-time chaplain at the prison told me was that the moment, the day when they get there is the worst day in their life, always, because they have no hope, right? They come into that jail and they have no hope. And he always insisted that he or I or whoever, right, meet with the people right after intake, right? He's always there right after intake, because to live without hope is the worst thing that can happen to a human, right? Of all the bad things that happen, to live without hope, he thought was the worst thing. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. And part of what the Advent reminds us is that we're clay, right? That Christ can mold us regardless, that there's always hope for something better, that there's always a possibility that we could be something else. And part of what we cultivate during this time is just an awareness of what could be. We recognize what's going wrong, but we also turn that around and say, there could be something good that comes out of this. We could transform this, right? People are starving, but we could feed them. People are sick, but we can provide healing and consolation. People are grieving, but we believe in the resurrection, and we know that there's always something else. I just heard this story yesterday. I don't know if it's true or not, but it should be if it's not. There was a famous church in Oxford that has a huge clock, right? So you go into and this happens in a lot of medieval churches, right? That there's instead of a stained glass window, it has like this huge clock, and it was famous because it was one of the first clocks to run on electricity, and so it was kind of exotic when they first built it because you didn't have to wind it up or anything, right? It just ran on electricity. But the problem was when they had daylight savings time, then they had to wind it back an hour. But that was really difficult to do because you had to wind it from the inside, but you couldn't see through the wall, couldn't see through the clock because of all the machinery. Where the what do you call that? The arm or the hand or whatever went. So you're trying to move it back a whole hour, but you couldn't actually see what you were doing. So they would wind it, they would run up to the top, and they'd wind it a little bit, and they'd run downstairs and look out and say, "Oh, you got to go another 20 degrees." So they'd run back upstairs and then run back down, and then they'd go too far, and so they'd have to go back and move it back. And apparently, it was quite a process trying to figure out how to wind this clock. Until finally, a citizen of the city watched this whole process one day and just kind of sat out and observed as they were running back and forth and paid attention and finally came up to them and said, next year, let's do this differently. I got a better idea. So next year came, and he had a little pocket watch in his hand. And they thought, this is really weird. What are you going to do? You got to time it? What are you going to do? And so what he did was he walked into the mechanism of the clock, pulled out the fuse so that the clock stopped for an hour, timed it for an hour. When that was over, he put the fuse back in. The clock started right back up, and it was on perfect time. Like they'd done this for years, and it just took somebody paying attention, right, to kind of figure out there was another way to go. I think that's kind of what we're called to today, right? To just pay attention, right? Just to see what is not there, but also see what is there, and see if we can't find some possibilities for hope in the world. Okay, so maybe as we kind of work our way to communion, maybe let's just think about what are some things we can do? What are some things we can think about? I already talked about staying off Facebook, but what else? I mean, just kind of what, as I say that, does anything come to mind? And you don't even have to say it out loud, right? If you just want to, I'm comfortable with silence. So if you just want to think it in your head, that's fine too. But just, yeah, go ahead, Tyson.
A little bit earlier, you were talking about the idea of waiting and what do we do as we wait. The first thing that came to my mind is, this practice of daily scripture reading.
Mm-hmm. That's
something where I'm constantly reminding myself of the good story and the good God who, works all things together. And
yeah,
it's a constant reminder of looking forward to the day He makes all things right.
Yeah, that's a great one. And there are, and you or Robin or somebody sent like a daily scripture reading, and I think that's a great resource. There's also Biola University publishes a daily Advent reading, which you subscribe to, and they just send you there's a devotional, but it's mostly just biblical text, and you kind of read through that. Yeah, that's fantastic, I think. And it's just a good discipline of waiting. Like it just forces you to sit for 20 minutes and stop your day and do something else for a while, and then you go back to your day. But there's a real discipline in that. Good. Anything else kind of jump to mind? We always like to ring bells with the Salvation Army. We haven't. We used to do at Minnesota, we did a live Advent every year for some reason. I have no idea, but it's just been going on. It was one of those things that you just kind of did. There was no real reason for it, but we just did it. But it was really popular. Like thousands of people came. That was a good exercise in waiting because you would have to dress up because it was always cold, like below zero kind of cold. So we dress up in 20 layers and have to stand outside and not move while all these cars drove by.
Sort of thinking about the lights that people hang up.
Mhm.
Some people much more religiously oriented than others, but still, it's leading up to anticipation.
Yep. Yeah, I've read that people are responding to COVID by putting up lights, like it's a kind of sign of hope. And there's something to that. All right. Well, this is the thing to think about, though. I think for Advent is just what do we do, right? How do we kind of wait? How do we pay attention? What kinds of things can we see? How do we pull the fuse, right, and make things a little bit easier for the world? And then obviously the most significant way that we do that is to continue our regular practice of coming to the table together. If we get nothing else from our time of communion, what we get is this moment when we realize there's something else, right? There's a moment when we're forced to stop and to see the crucified and risen Christ and know that there's hope for us, right? That Jesus is coming back because he's risen, right? And if he's risen, then he's coming back. And that puts us in the right frame of mind to recognize that we're going somewhere else, and that the world could be fundamentally different. And there's a lot that happens at the table, but at the foundation of it, I think that's what it is. And we're coming to the baby Jesus, but the crucified and risen Jesus is the ultimate goal of all this. And so through Advent, we don't stop communion, right? We don't stop coming to the table, because that is the centerpiece of who we are as Christians.